You have to restrict specifically BCAAs, the branched chain amino acids, which are leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And the major one in some of the studies is really isoleucine. That's the big one. Restricting that drives the hormone fibroblast growth factor 21, FGF21. There's other benefits outside of FGF21 that we can talk about as well for insulin sensitivity, which is the lower protein intake and the lower fat intake can actually optimize insulin sensitivity as well. So there's other things going on besides just the FGF21, but the big fanfare is around the FGF21 signaling from these different diets, because basically FGF21 increases metabolic rate. So
any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Well, you've heard about keto, you've heard about carnivore. Have you heard about the sugar diet? Don't just jump in right yet. That's not licensed to just go eat some candy bars and drink Coke. Welcome to Accelerated Health with Sara Banta, where I cut through the noise and fast track your journey to better health. I'm your host, Sara Banta, CEO and founder of Accelerated Health Products and certified by the National Association of Nutritional Professionals. I'm here to share the latest on supplements, wellness hacks, natural health solutions that actually work, from boosting energy to detoxing to balancing hormones and everything in between. I will help you reach your optimal health. So let's dive in. I have one of my favorite guests back, Mike Fave. You've got to go back and listen to all of our episodes together. He is a wealth of knowledge. Hi, Mike. How are you today?
Hey, Sarah, thanks for inviting me. Pleasure to be here. And thanks for the great introduction.
Well, there's no one better to have described this new trend of the sugar diet. And I think everyone's like, oh my gosh, is this licensed to eat whatever I want? But it's not that simple, right? And I want to dive into where it's coming from. Why are people having success with it, by the way? And is it something we should really be taking seriously? So I don't know where you want to start if you've tried it. I mean, the thing is, for those who have listened to you before, you're not afraid of carbs. And you have taught me to incorporate more carbs in my diet. And the other thing is not all carbs are the same. So a lot of people will say, oh, well, I can't do carbs because they were triggered or had gut issues from one type of carb. And then they put that all carbs in that same basket. And it's kind of like the vegan who eats that one piece of bad chicken and says, I can't eat meat totally. And so I'm going to cut out a whole food group, right? So where do we start with this sugar diet? Maybe you can talk about why it's become such a trend, and maybe what it looks like.
Yeah, so it's a great starting point. I think the trend is kind of a knee-jerk reaction to the low-carb stuff that we've had for a while between carnivore, keto, low-carb in general. And I think there's a large portion of people who've gone through these different dietary spheres, and they've done the restricting stuff in terms of carbohydrates. And then now it's like, oh, there's this solution where I can eat as much carbohydrate as I want and I lose weight, because there's been the narrative that's gone on for an extended period of time that carbs are going to cause diabetes, insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease, cancer. All of these different things are driven by carbs. And then I think people are, oh, sugar diet, I can eat not only just like carbs in general, but I can eat refined sugars. And all of a sudden I'm going to start to lose significant amounts of weight. And people are actually losing significant amounts of weight. So to be fair, people are losing weight with the diet. That is true. And I think that the anecdotal experiences that are being put online by people showing their journeys with the sugar diet is prompting a lot of people to, the first time they hear it, they're like, that sounds like some BS. Like, I know about carbs. And then they see like 10 people on YouTube being like, I lost 10 pounds in 15 days. And they're like, well, I've got 10 pounds to lose. So and I want to have carbohydrates. I haven't had, anything sweet in years because I've been on keto. And then they're like, well, let's see if I can lose this last 10 pounds, this last 20 pounds and have some carbs. So I think that's the impetus, the anecdotal experience and a knee-jerk reaction to the previous carbohydrate restriction.
Okay, so what does it look like? Because it's not just eat a whole bunch of sugar. There's a limit on the fats and the proteins that you're supposed to eat. And when you look at how it works and the mechanism of it, correct me if I'm wrong. It's a lot like any other diet. Number one, it's caloric restriction because you're cutting out food groups. And you honestly can only eat so much sugar before you get sick. And then two, it's playing with some hormones. And so it's not, any diet isn't about just calories in, calories out. It's how it is affecting the cascade of hormones in your body. So let's look at what does it look like throughout the day first.
So there's different setups because the diet's not really solidified yet. You have different camps to some extent. So you have Cole Robinson, who, well, he's not the originator per se, because the vegan, fruitarian, 80-10-10 people have been pushing this type of diet for a long, long time, but it just wasn't always centered around fruit with the exception of the fruitarians. So Cole Robinson was the originator of the snake diet. He came out and he was talking about sugar fasting, which was essentially, and it's changed over time. It has been solidified, but it was 100 days of only sugar. No protein, no fat. This was for people who had quite a bit of body fat, like that were clinically diagnosable as obese, to run this, drop a lot of weight rapidly. So he was talking about his experience with Mark Bell, and Mark took the diet, and Mark started running the diet, but Mark has evolved over time with his diet. So it started out with just doing the sugar stuff, and then now he's playing around with having protein on some days and having sugar, like only sugar on other days. And his goal is to get down to a very low body fat percentage, I think around like 200 pounds. So that was a little bit different. And then prior to Cole Robinson and Mark Bell getting into this, there was a variety of trends on Twitter with individual. His name is not publicly available. So the last person or another kind of originator of this theme of diet was an individual on Bioenergetic Twitter. He doesn't have his full name publicly available, but he goes by the handle Anabology. And he was setting up what's called a honey diet, which is basically honey throughout the day, then a little kind of break period or fasting period, not really a fast, but a couple hours break. And there's a third iteration of the diet that's essentially, there's a individual on Twitter. His name is not publicly available, but his Twitter handle is Anabology. And he has what's called a honey diet, which is a similar iteration of a sugar diet, where he has honey all day long, ad libitum, as much as he wants. There's a short break period, and then he has a meal that's protein and vegetables and things like this before bed, or the last meal of the day. And it's basically supposed to optimize, and we'll get into this, there's a hormone called FGF21 that gets upregulated with amino acid restriction, particularly branched-chain amino acids, and most specifically isoleucine, and carbohydrate overfeeding, particularly from sugars, particularly things that have both glucose and fructose present over starches. So all of these diets are very similar to each other. There's definitely nuances and differences between them. The mechanisms are about the same to some extent. And there's some pros and some of them are better than other ones. I guess you could say it that way.
So when you say sugar, we're not talking about complex carbohydrates. There's no rice or potatoes or starches. It's just simply fruit sugars or honey or candy or sodas, that sort of thing.
Yes, just some anything that's free fructose and glucose, or something that has sucrose, which is glucose and fructose bonded together. This is what you're looking for: honey, maple syrup, fruit juice, whole fruits. And then people on some of the diets are going as far as sodas and candies. And obviously there's a vast difference even between those sources, even though they all have sugars per se.
Okay, so what is the mechanism when you restrict the amino acids? And this would even include like a whey protein shake or an essential amino acid supplement. Am I correct?
Yes. You have to, you have to restrict specifically BCAAs, the branched chain amino acids, which are leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And the major one in some of the studies is really isoleucine. That's the big one. Restricting that drives the hormone fibroblast growth factor 21, FGF21. There's other benefits outside of FGF21 that we can talk about as well for insulin sensitivity, which is the lower protein intake and the lower fat intake can actually optimize insulin sensitivity as well. So there's other things going on besides just the FGF21, but the big fanfare is around the FGF21 signaling from these different diets, because basically FGF21 increases metabolic rate. So in some of the studies, I think it was in some of the rat studies and even in human studies, there was an 18% increase in metabolic rate with the sugar overfeeding on a low protein diet. Now, how that's increased is important, because I think that there's some problems with it. But I think that is in part responsible for why people are actually losing the weight with this diet. It's hard to eat enough, and then you have a metabolic increase on top of that. So it's easier to drop into that caloric deficit when you're doing this type of diet. And then, yeah, people are going to lose weight. I think some of the speed at which we're seeing the weight loss is not entirely fat tissue. I think a lot of people are dropping off water weight fast, just like the keto stuff, right, for a variety of different reasons. And so I think some of it is that, because there's right now a lot of it's anecdotal, but there's people who are coming back saying, hey, I dropped like a pound a day or 5 pounds in 5 days or whatever the thing is. And then they're saying, oh, if I add starches back in, I gain the weight back. And it's like, okay, maybe there's some fluid shifting going around. So I think that rate of weight loss is a little quick.
Okay, so 2 questions. Number 1, water weight, probably they're losing, but what about muscle weight? Are we measuring our fat weight loss versus our muscle weight loss, or is it just the bathroom scale? We're looking at the number going down.
Well, that is one of the problems, and that was I made a video discussing some of the key issues with the diet, and essentially there is concern from my end that people are actually losing lean tissue, losing muscle mass. People are saying, oh, it doesn't look like it. But you can't really gauge based just on does it look like it, especially in somebody who has quite a bit of body fat. You're not going to be able to see the change in muscle tissue that fast because it's covered by or shrouded by the body fat. So I think there's a chance that there are people who are actually losing lean muscle tissue. And the question is, on the shorter term time frame, they may not really be losing that much. But when I'm thinking about like what percentage of lean tissue is actually lost. At least when I'm trying to set up somebody for a weight loss diet, I'm looking to keep the lean tissue loss as minimal as possible, as low, if not have them gain muscle tissue by putting in resistance training. So if we're having a diet here where maybe they're losing 10 pounds in a week, somebody else losing 5 pounds in a week, but the extra 5 pounds that the person's losing on the 10-pound weight loss setup is from their muscle tissue, that's worse than somebody who's losing slower. And we don't have the data to see for some of these people their pre and post DEXA scans or pre and post bioelectrical impedance, so that we get a true gauge of what the rate of lean tissue loss is compared to another weight loss setup. So we do just have the scale coming down for people at a quick pace, and we don't know what the full distribution is, at least from what I've seen online. I don't preach to know, like watch everyone's FGF21 sugar diet content, so maybe somebody has put it out. But I haven't seen videos where people are doing pre and post saying, hey, I lost 20 pounds and X percentage was lean muscle tissue and X percentage was fat tissue and X percentage was water.
And then with the role on metabolism and how it's jacking up the metabolism, is it increasing the efficacy of the thyroid hormones, or is it under a different mechanism?
So basically in order to stimulate FGF21, you have to drive pretty significant metabolic stress to the liver. So you got to really piss your liver off, basically. And then your liver upregulates this hormone. And the hormone's job is to to increase the oxidation of fuel sources through like a kind of a wasteful metabolism, through an uncoupling mechanism. So it just basically turns it to heat. It doesn't turn it to ATP. It upregulates uncoupling in the fat tissue, browns fat tissue, things like this. And I think the goal with this is to try to get the number one, you have a substrate coming in without the amino acids. And so you're trying to burn through that extra substrate. The body's trying to get through that extra substrate, all this carbohydrate. And then on top of that, you're trying to eat a little bit more so you can get the amino acids you need. So the body's compensating for the lack of amino acid by upregulating the food intake and then burning off the excess substrate in an adaptive fashion. So I don't think it's necessarily a ideal pathway to optimize, because the problems that aren't being talked about with FGF21 is, again, some of this is mouse research. So, people who are listening know that mouse research doesn't always 100% translate into human research, but you see loss of bone mass, you see loss of muscle tissue, you see impacts on fertility, you see upregulation in the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So that's your stress axis with cortisol and things like this. And then it drives the sympathetic nervous system directly to upregulate that like wasting or burning off of the excess energy. So it's creating a stress response, and in order to, or you're inducing stress, and then you're using a stress pathway to have these effects. And yeah, it upregulates metabolism, and you may be able to eat more carbohydrate and lose weight on the scale faster. But I think some of these other things are the costs that people need to know when they go into it. It's like, hey, like if I'm going to do this, here's my Ben Franklin list, right? Here's my pros, here's my cons. I'm not telling people to do whatever you want to do. That's everybody's autonomy. They have their right to do whatever they want to do. But you want to get a full breakdown of what your pros and your cons are before you embark on an experiment.
Right. And I always like to touch on thyroid and liver, because I think those two organs just have such a huge impact on your overall health. So when you're saying it's pissing off your liver, this can't be good long term.
Well, and this is the one thing to keep in mind. The proponents of this diet are not talking about doing it long term. Besides Cole, which I would argue 100 days is a long time for something like this. Other people in the comments section would argue against me. That's fine. Everybody has their own interpretation of that. But people like Mark are not saying to do it long term. Anabology is saying to do it within a day. So the question, and this is where you start to get into the nuances of, if you did a sugar fast twice a week, right? What is the long-term ramification of that down the line? Probably not the same as somebody who does 100 days straight of sugar fasting. Yeah. That may be different if they do it on a shorter time frame. But we do have other circumstances where people have done more extreme fasting regimens, like 3-day fast. I made a video about this with Peter Attia. He did his fasting regimens, and then I think he said after a decade of doing that or something, he lost 10 to 20 pounds of lean tissue. Mm-hmm. So the question is, will we see something like that with this sugar fasting protocol? And the answer is we don't know right now. The long-term sugar fasting information we have in humans is fruitarians, people who have run fruitarian diets over a long period of time, but they're doing it every day, which is a little bit different than the setup that Mark is talking about, or even Cole is talking about, or Anabology is talking about. And the fruitarians, you see fruitarians after the long-term setup of the diet. There's no muscle tissue anymore. They're very, very lean. And then there's a variety of other health problems that come with those diets. And I've worked with clients who came from fruitarian diets to try to recover them after that. So I think doing it long-term is off the table pretty much entirely. I think there's problems with doing that. The question is, how much of a negative impact does it have to do it in that short-term time frame? But since we have other fasting regimens, I think we will probably still see some detriments to running something like this. So this is basically where we're at this point. And we know from the animal research and from some of the human research that there is long-term detriments. Just does that play out if you did it twice a week or something like this? And at this point, I don't know, but I would say it's probably a spectrum, not an either or.
Okay. So before we get into more of the negatives and the positives, I want to talk about insulin, because we talk about insulin resistance a lot. Most people are suffering from some level of insulin resistance. And as you and I have discussed before, it's not all about sugar. However, when you are on a straight sugar diet for most of the day, is it going to negatively affect your insulin resistance?
So it will actually improve people's insulin resistance, which I know is weird for people to hear. But essentially, when you have somebody who has insulin resistance, right, diabetes, obesity, impaired glucose tolerance, pre-diabetes, whatever you want to call it, all of these different circumstances, what happens is you have free fatty acids kind of floating around all the time. And the free fatty acids and the excess supply of free fatty acids into the blood can impair insulin signaling long term if you have that constantly going on. And so when you have this like constant carbohydrate dump into the system and you don't have the fats, you minimize some of that competitive signaling. And you also, the insulin will suppress the release of free fatty acids. So you actually just get to a point where you're just using that one fuel source to a large extent. You're like just can push the carbohydrates. On top of that, protein and higher amounts, particularly in people who have impaired glucose tolerance, type 2 diabetes, pushes up gluconeogenesis, which is basically the production of glucose from the liver into the bloodstream. So if you lower your amino acids, particularly BCAAs, which can help really stimulate that process, down to a lower level, it doesn't have to be as low as what you're seeing on the sugar diet. It doesn't have to be 0. You could get even, I think in some of the studies, even like somewhere between 12 to 15% of your intake of protein, which depending on your caloric intake is not that low. My protein intake, while higher, is not that much higher than 15% intake of my total calories because of my total caloric intake. So in that circumstance, what you'll find is that gluconeogenesis gets stopped. It gets shut down. It doesn't get stopped, but it gets lowered a bit. And then that helps to further improve blood glucose regulation because you're not having this increased output from the liver of the carbohydrate as well. So the lower fat and the lower protein with the higher carb intake can force carb oxidation and improve the response to insulin at the cells ultimately. So it actually may improve it. Now, if you have somebody who already has high triglycerides and who has metabolic dysfunction and you start pumping high sugars or they have a fatty liver, there is a circumstance where some of these people may bump their triglyceride levels too high and start to, like, that could give them issues with their pancreatic function, pancreatitis and things like this. So you ought to be really careful doing that as well. And then on top of that, in some of these states like diabetes and obesity, there's actually a resistance to FGF21 signaling in some people. In some of the studies, you see resistance to FGF21 signaling. So some of these pathways in some people may not actually work as described because they may already have resistance to it because their FGF21 has already been upregulated because their liver has already been tapped. Their liver's already pissed off. So you can't, like, there's a point where you keep pissing off the organ and the organ's like, all right, I give up. Like, I retired. I'm done. I quit, guys. And so that's the other thing is for some people, it may not work as described because of these issues.
And because this is an extreme stressor and on the adrenals, what about people that have adrenal fatigue or just are completely tapped out?
So it depends on their context, I think. If you had somebody who came from like heavy fasting, low carb dieting, carnivore stuff, and they're deep in the pits of that, getting carbs back on board, I think will be a net positive for them. I think they'll feel a lot better because they start to lower some of the signaling from having low carbohydrate intake, from not having the carbs present. It will help to lower some of those components. However, I have done a very low fat diet before. I didn't drop my protein that low. I think I was 0.64 grams per pound of body weight per day. So it's not that low. It's still actually higher than the RDAs and a very high carb intake. And it does push up the catecholamine signaling. So after a period of time, I was having anxiety. I couldn't sleep. I was having blood sugar crashes all across the day because I didn't have enough fat. And then also the other thing this depends though is I have clients who can go lower fat and do the higher carb thing when they have a bit more body fat and they don't get the same symptoms right away. For me, when I did it, I was already leaner. So context changes that, but you can start to push into this circumstance where you start to get more of the catecholaminergic signaling, and you can feel that. You can feel that if you go high carb, low fat, and I think very high carb, low fat, low protein. I think the effects will be even stronger. So I think there's that. Some people are probably going to feel better initially, especially from low carb. But I think as you run it a little bit longer, you may run into this, I need to eat every hour thing. Because if not, my blood sugar is dropping. And I have clients who I'm currently working with who have tried Like they came from the sugar diet stuff. Like I tried the sugar diet and I had this. Can you help me troubleshoot it? I guess because I was making videos about it. And that was some of the things that they've described happening.
Okay, and so how much protein are we talking in that last meal that we should eat? And where does collagen fit into this?
So I want to be clear from my perspective, and I think this is a big question in this sphere. For me, I think the best setup for somebody is going to be a mixed macronutrient diet. And what I mean by that is across the day, you have adequate carbs, adequate protein, and adequate fat, and your total energy intake is dialed in effectively for your particular goal, so that basically if you have adequate protein and you have adequate carbs, you spare the loss of lean muscle tissue, especially if you're weight training, and you adjust the carb and fat down a little bit so that you're in appropriately set up deficit. And then basically what happens, you just start taking off body fat. And I've had people from all spectrums, even women who are postmenopausal, hypothyroid, all this stuff, they will still lose weight if you set up the diet appropriately. Like consistent weight loss, like 20 pounds, 30 pounds, 40-pound weight loss takes a little bit longer than I lost 10 pounds in 7 days stuff, but takes a little bit longer. But I will measure pre and post bioelectrical impedance scans or DEXA scans, and you can see lean tissue loss is very, very minimal, if any, if it's done appropriately. The thing is, it's just setting up this diet requires, a little bit more complexity and detail than just I don't have protein and fat and I just smash sugar all day long, and that's the only rule I need to know. So that's the trade-off, right? A little more of a complex system, but you don't lose as much lean mass. And then I think the long-term repercussions are not really the same.
And before you go on, Mike, I am 1,000% on board with you. I think this is extreme. It's just one more way to eliminate a food group, because our ancestors, our grandparents didn't even talk about keto, carnivore, vegan, sugar diets. Why? Because they were just eating whole foods that were not adulterated by all of these toxins and pesticides and glyphosate and all these things that are causing these chronic diseases, where people are like, oh my gosh, what do? I need to do something because I'm gaining weight. I have brain fog. My hormones are out of whack. So let's just cut out a macronutrient, and that's going to inherently cause you to calorie restrict. Because even if it's sugar, you can only eat so much. If it's protein or a high protein diet or a carnivore diet, you can only eat so many prime ribs, right? And so my going over all of this, I wanted to just describe exactly what people are talking about so people understand how the mechanisms work, but that it's not the ultimate solution. Like if we could just eat whole food, and if we could just, as I was laughing, my two of my kids are in Europe at the moment, and they're like, Mom, I can almost eat anything because it's not full of these toxins that are allowed in the US. And they feel great. And my son, he's like, my pants are loose and, you don't have all this inflammation. So if we just stuck to real food, it would take care of a lot of the problem. But the mechanism too, this is the interesting part of this that really interests me, is that it isn't about calories in, calories out. It's a hormonal shift. It's doing something to your hormones. And eventually, any caloric restrictive diet is going to lower your metabolic rate. So long term, I'm assuming, yes, you'll see that initial rev up because you're stressed and you're like, okay, what the body's ready to go. It's got this overabundance of carbohydrates, which you talk a lot about when you're eating a proper balance of protein, fats, and carbs, that your body says, okay, I'm safe. I can actually increase my metabolism. But this is that at an extreme where you're taking away the protein to maintain the tissues and the muscles and all of the other things in the body. Is that correct?
Well, this one's actually, it's not even ramping up the metabolism because you're taking the extra carbs and it's saying, hey, like we have this abundance of carbs. It's ramping up the metabolism because you don't have amino acids and the body is trying to burn through the extra substrate and get more amino acids. So it's not really doing it because it's this massive signal of abundance. It's actually a signal of scarcity in terms of amino acid supply, which is then your body is basically compensating, saying, hey, like if we eat more food, maybe we'll get more amino acids here, and we'll just burn off this substrate in the meantime so that we could try to get the amino acids we need. And it's the liver specifically, because the liver has a very high need for amino acids for a variety of processes. So basically the way you trigger FGF21, there's a variety of different pathways, but they are all centered around either protein unfolding responses, which is basically impaired protein processing in the liver cells in the endoplasmic reticulum, or lack of amino acids, or downregulation of mTOR. Like all the ways that you drive FGF21 are not good things. They're not good ways to drive FGF21. It's basically telling the liver's like, oh man, like we have a problem. Like we need to like signal this hormone so that we could try to like resolve this problem. So it's through a hormetic mechanism that it's working. And I think long term it will, for some people, depending on how they have it set up. Because the other thing is how you have it set up, again, modulates this. You're doing blow pops, Sour Patch Kids, jelly beans, sodas, and whatever else. I think that's just not a good idea long term. I'm gonna like throw my 2 cents in, my line in the sand. Terrible idea long term for this stuff.
Yeah.
If you're gonna do it with fruits, whole fruits, 100% fruit juice, and then I think the most sound setup is anabology setup, where you have the protein and the fat and I would actually put carbs at night as well. I think that's the most reasonable setup, so that on a daily basis you are still supplying the amino acids, so that the body like, okay, like we're gonna get some amino acids here, and you still have all the other time if you really want to push the FGF21. I'm not a massive fan of pushing the FGF21 pathway, but I'm not naive to the fact that some people are not gonna do the really like, I'm gonna meticulously set up my diet, I'm gonna like make sure my protein is this, my carbs are that, and I'm gonna be consistent with it. Some people, it's like, I don't care about it. I just want to see the weight come off on the scale. And then when I start to see the weight come down, like, yeah, then I'll get healthy. It's like, maybe, I mean, if you didn't do it from the jump, like maybe, but some people do see progress, and the progress kicks them into a good pathway, a good way of improving their health. A lot of people did that with keto. Mm-hmm. So people lost a bunch of weight with keto. They lost it rapidly. And then they're like, oh, maybe I should change my food quality. Oh, maybe I should, get micronutrients. Maybe I should get some sun. Maybe I should exercise a bit more. And I think on a net, that's great. And I think people seeing progress and moving them in that direction is really good. But I think if you're going to do it, that's why I made a video about it. If you're going to do it, I would try to do it that way to minimize the downsides. And then as far as the collagen setup that you had asked me about, there's basically, I think the fairy princess diet, which I don't know that much about. So please no one misquote me on or use me as an authority for this or expert on it. I don't know anything about the diet. I haven't looked at it. I just know roughly that it's aligned with this sphere. Essentially, what I set up, because I was looking at the research, you could put collagen or gelatin throughout the day because it doesn't have a high amount of branching amino acids like isoleucine, leucine, or valine. And then you could still get some of the proteins from that. But you're still driving the FGF21 response because you still are restricting some amino acids that the liver needs for metabolic functions. So this type of stuff, I think, is, it's like these are all workarounds for the problem. I think the best option is what I mentioned.
Yeah.
And I do think people need to take weight off, because one of the problems with the bioenergetic sphere is that people are like, I'm not losing weight. And it's like, I do think losing weight is important. But I'm a fan of making an appropriate deficit for a period of time to get that body fat off. Is there some stress associated with it? 100%. But I think when you come out of it on the back end, the body fat's down, metabolic function's improved, and then you maintain and you can bring that stuff back up. Like, I think that's probably the best way to go instead of some of these other pathways, these more extreme things. So I think the downsides with them start to become pretty high long term.
So a lot of people that did keto, then when they started incorporating carbs, the body was not metabolically flexible. It just got used to burning the fat. And then the weight just really packed on. And then they said, I can't eat carbs, right? So would it be the opposite of this, where the body is like, I don't need to know how to burn fat because I'm not getting any fat. I'm not strengthening those muscles to metabolize fat. So will they see that rebound effect when they start incorporating more fat in their diet?
So I think a lot of people for keto specifically, like, or low carb, they gained fat because when they came off the diet, particularly into bioenergetic, they kept their fat high. And I see this, it's like the most common, I guess, mistake that I see people make with the diet. I gained weight when I went to bioenergetic. It's like, well, how's your fat intake? Oh, 100, 130 grams of fat a day. It's like, what's your carb intake? Like 250, 300. It's like, what's your total caloric requirement? Oh, I don't know. It's like, well, you're in a surplus, so you're going to gain weight. Like, this is what's supposed to happen. This is a normal response. So I think that's one of the biggest. I don't even think a lot of people can't burn the carbohydrate. I just think that they get into a circumstance where they're in this surplus because of how the diet's set up. And that's why I'm not even telling people, look, you need to track your diet every day. I'm just saying, when you come out and you start making changes, throw it in Chronometer, see where things are at, get an estimate. That's why I have the blueprint on my website so you can calculate and see your calories and macros and get a gauge of where you should be for maintenance, so that you don't just go like level 10 on your total intake and then start to gain weight. And so for the sugar diet, I do think that people will be able to add fat back in to the diet and protein back in, and not necessarily gain a ton of weight if it's done right. If they just throw fat and protein back in and they lost a lot of lean mass in the process, their resting energy metabolism or metabolic rate is going to be lower because they don't have that lean tissue. And then whatever the adaptive effects are from the stress response of driving FGF21 long term, like, that may be a circumstance where the metabolism is lower coming off the back end of that. So I think in those circumstances, those people, if they don't pay attention to their intake, it's rebound city, like you see with Ozempic, like you see with all of these weight loss diets. And this is part of the problem, and this is the sticky area. But it's a lot of this, I think, is psychological, where people just, I want to see the weight loss and I want to see it fast, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to see that weight loss. But I don't want to track it all, and I don't want to see anything where I'm at. I don't want to it's too detailed. I don't have time for that. So it's like, okay, fine. I understand you. I hear you. I get it. It's like, it's like this some nerdy diet stuff. You watch me do it. You're like, I'm not going to track my stuff in Chronometer. Look at this guy. But then what are you going to do on the back end? That's my question. When you come out, you're going to have to set up some reasonable dietary setup over the long term to optimize your health, not just weight loss, but to optimize your health. So at some point, you're going to have to invest in spending a little bit of time and energy to figure out what you need to optimize your health. And I think if you're not going to do it up front, my question is, will you do it on the back end? And that's one of the big things that I'm concerned about for people. And that's why I think people will hop diet to diet to diet to diet, because they're looking for a quick response, and then it becomes unsustainable, and then they rebound and then they look for the next thing after, instead of just trying to be like, hey, can I set up a system that's specific to me, that helps me not only maintain my weight optimally, not just keep my body fat down, but keep my muscle mass high, and then also optimize my health. My lipid panel looks good. My hormonal function is good. I sleep throughout the night. My energy is stable. All of these types of things. And then I can maintain that over the long term. I can maintain that into old age or whatever the deal is. For me, that's my ultimate goal for people. So that is a little bit also a different perspective than somebody who's, I just want to see the weight come down. Like, that's not my mentality. My mentality is long-term health, which includes losing body fat for some people. But at the same time, that losing body fat isn't just the sole focus. 'Cause you can lose body fat fast, but again, if it comes at a cost of long-term health, I think that there's probably not going to be much sustainability in it.
I want to, before we go, touch on the downsides of a lack of fat in the diet, because we don't need to be on a high fat diet, but you need some fat in your diet for your hormones and your brain and all the things, but for the liver. So can you dive into that a bit?
Sure. So there's a variety of benefits to fat. So I think a lot of people are like, well, you're bioenergetics, you must do low fat, Randall cycle, you can't have carbs and fat at the same time, all this stuff. But actually, I think fat is extremely important. I think each macronutrient is extremely important, like vitamins and minerals are extremely important. You want to have enough of each one for optimal functioning and not too much, right? There's a Goldilocks zone for everything. Now with fat specifically, if fat gets too low, a couple problems happen. We talk about liver and digestive tract. The fat triggers the release of bile acids from the gallbladder. And that's extremely important for a variety of reasons. The first one is the bile acid release into the small intestine clears the small intestine of bacterial overgrowth, bacterial products in general, like things like endotoxin. So if you don't have that long term, I've had people who've done very low fat diets, they start to get digestive issues. The bile acids also stimulate peristaltic activity in the intestine. So if you don't have that, people can develop constipation on very low fat diets. On top of that, the liver secretes all of the components it detoxifies into bile. And so if you don't have the bile dropping into the intestine and then the fiber from your foods pulling out that bile, you keep recirculating the bile, or the bile doesn't even go into the intestine from the get-go, and the liver can't effectively detoxify things well. I think that can create issues. On top of the fact that if the bile sits too long, they have studies in people with obesity, really low-calorie diets, which typically are very low in fat, so you don't get that stimulation of gallbladder contraction, and they get gallstones and bile sludge, which is also not a good thing. You know, it's extremely painful. I had them gallstones when I was younger. It's not a good thing. So those are things to pay attention with in the digestive front. On top of that, from a blood glucose standpoint, the fats are important for delaying gastric emptying. So when you have a meal, what's going to determine, at least in my experience, how long somebody lasts between meals, how much fat they have. So if you have 5 grams of fat for breakfast, even if so say I sat here and I had 100 grams of carbs, it was fruit, 100% fruit juice, maybe some starch, something like this, and then I had maybe some lean protein, whey protein, or some chicken or something like this, I probably will last like an hour and a half, 2 hours max. If I have fat with that meal, mac nuts, dark chocolate, some olive oil on the vegetable, whatever the deal is, I can extend it out depending on how much olive oil I put in the meal to 3 hours, 4 hours, etc. Because the fat will basically slow drip the food for me into my system by delaying the gastric emptying. So I find that adjusting fat content allows people to last between meals longer. You do the really low fat, really low protein stuff, you're up and down all day long on your blood sugar and on your hunger. Then the fat is also really important for hormonal function. So I've had quite a few clients, young guys, young ladies, 20s, 30s, drop their fat intake too low. Guys, testosterone tanks, their libido goes in the toilet. All of the symptoms that go with low hormonal function start to become apparent. And I've seen women lose their cycles when they've dropped their fat intake too low because you don't have this substrate for the hormones. It adjusts some of that signaling. For me, like I know there's a threshold in my diet. It's like less than 80 grams of fat, I'm starting to have problems. Mm-hmm. It feel much better, 80, 100 grams, somewhere in between there is kind of where I've optimized over time. So these are some of the problems that people will run into. And then on top of that, when you don't have the fat, you're driving the blood glucose stuff. And then if you are pushing up the FGF21 and driving up the sympathetic nervous system from the sugar overfeeding, low protein, I think you also can get a lot of anxiety. For me, when I did very low fat, I had a lot of anxiety. After a period of time, I basically was getting like panic attacks from the very low fat intake, and I had to eat sugar all day long, like out of a bag with a spoon, and I felt very bad doing that. Now, there's a caveat here. People who have more body fat may be able to handle it a little bit better, but the leaner you get, the bank account's on empty. So you got to be careful if you run too low in fat as you get leaner. So the context also changed as your body composition changes and as your health state changes and your ability to use fuel changes in these different states, the effects can become stronger or not as strong depending on where you are in the spectrum of your metabolic health. Some things you may be much more sensitive. You're lean, you're exercising, you have a lot of muscle tissue, and you try to pull the low fat stuff, you may have a bad time. If you have some body fat to lose, metabolic function is not so great, you could probably get away with it without having very significant negative effects like somebody in a different context.
Yeah, I've noticed for me, if I have a day where I'm eating more like salmon or ribeyes or, a fattier meat, I don't tend to add a lot of fat to my foods, but I eat what comes with my meat, right? And I don't shy away from the gristle. But then the following day, I won't necessarily crave as much fat. And it's almost like my body's telling me, no, you can go leaner today and bump up the carbs. And maybe if I go too lean for a couple of days, oh no, I'm craving some fat. My brain's craving it. And just like you said, that anxiety can kind of come in, and it really can just calm me down. So it's just another lesson of being intuitive with your own body, and you don't have to get caught up in, these macros, these grams, and counting and tracking. Because I also think that can cause anxiety for people too, because it's just one more thing to think about and stress about on top of family and finances and all the things, right? So and tell me if I'm wrong, Mike, if you just stick to whole food in a balanced macronutrient way, you're going to feel your best. It's going to be hard to go wrong. And, your food guide, and I have one that's very similar as well, where it's just like, just stick to the whole foods, and you're going to be satisfied, because those foods are going to trigger to the brain saying, hey, I'm getting enough nutrients. I don't need to binge right now. I've got plenty of fuel. So tell me where I'm missing, on what you would do with your clients.
I think it depends on where the person's at. If you have somebody because I'm working with people, type 2 diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, they have had heart attacks, they have had strokes, their blood pressure's high. In these circumstances, the diet and the supplements are interventions. So this is not a maintenance phase. This is we need to get stuff under control phase so that we don't have another problem again. And in that situation, there needs to be specific adjustments to get things under control. But the thing is, for me, is it's just a phase of setting things up, changing habits, getting used to eating in a particular way, switching your food types, looking at your intake amounts and stuff like this. Because a lot of people, you develop different habits from the diets you do. That's when with the keto stuff, people come out of keto and it's like olive oil and butter on everything, just hold the bottle upside down and we're good to go. And in these circumstances, I think that can create issues for some people. So it's just looking at these things. For me, my job is to look at that in detail and make the adjustments to get people to their outcomes. But once you get your outcomes, you have a system set up, then it's just maintenance. Yeah, you don't really have to look at things that much. It becomes much easier. But I think in the beginning, when somebody has the issues and the problems, I think for me, I like to really get into the weeds and the details and solve those problems with the supplements, with diet, with lifestyle changes, create a system out of it. And then the person, then they're good to go. Then they just maintain going forward. And then it's, you eat good, high quality whole foods. And then, you have a general template in your mind of what you're going to do with your meals, a good protein source. You're going to have a fat source. You're going to have the carb sources that you tolerate. And then you're going to have maybe a fiber source, which could be either the carb sources or maybe some cooked veg or something like this. So the meals just become like that. And you have maybe your 3 meals or 3 meals and a snack. And the setup becomes that. And you just get used to eating that way. So you don't always have to religiously track everything. If you have 100 pounds to lose and you're type 2 diabetic, I'm going to have to make specific adjustments. If you just had a stroke or you had a heart attack and your lipid panel and all these things are out of whack, I'm going to have to make specific adjustments. And then when you get to a better spot, it's just maintaining. So I think it just depends on where people are at. For you, Sarah, you're pretty healthy, right? So you're in the maintenance phase where it's I eat good foods. I make sure my macros are dialed in, and I take care of myself from a lifestyle standpoint. And you're in the easy coasting phase. It's when people have that problem, you have to get over the hump, and then you get into the coast.
Yep, I totally get it, and I totally agree. So I can't believe we're out of time, Mike. This was so amazing because, there's so many questions about the sugar diet and there's so much confusion, and everyone's just, their heads are spinning because they're just, keto, carnivore, vegan, vegetarian, Mediterranean, paleo, and now sugar. So thank you for clarifying. And I know you have a lot of content on your channel about the sugar diet, and you're getting more and more into the weeds of it. So even things that we didn't cover today, there will be more science behind it. If you guys like science, you're going to like Mike. Sometimes I have to read over your emails multiple times and listen to your podcast, which is awesome. And that's what you want. You don't want this. You don't want the podcast where you're like, yeah, I already know that. I already know that. Just keep going. Mike, you really deliver the goods. So thank you, and tell people where they can find you and listen to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I appreciate the kind words. And if people want to find me, they can find me on my website, mikefave.com, or my YouTube, Mike Fave YouTube.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Mike, and I can't wait for our next discussion.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sarah. I appreciate it.
Another amazing podcast with Mike Fave. I love having him on. He's just a wealth of knowledge. I just wanted to touch on big picture here. Most of you, even thinking about the sugar diet, number one, you're either totally addicted to sugar and you're trying to make this fit for you, or number two, you're just grasping at another way to lose weight. And as Mike and I were talking about, in the end, if you set yourself up with the right macros in a balanced way, prioritizing wild animal protein is number one for me. And the wild is important because you're getting rid of the conventional fats from the conventional meat that have high omega-6 fatty acids. It's more inflammatory. They've been fed antibiotics, and they've been fed Skittles, and they've been fed corn. And you are what you ate, not just what you eat. So the wild is really important. But with that, I want to get you some supplements that are going to get you off that hump, where your metabolism is working for you and you don't have to restrict protein to trigger a hormone to rev up your metabolism in a false way that stresses out your body. So the three supplements I want to focus on. Number one, accelerated iodine. Iodine, we're mostly deficient, causes low thyroid function, which is going to make, it doesn't matter what diet you're on, you're not going to burn fat. You're not going to have energy. You need iodine to detox the cells. You need iodine to feed your thyroid. The thyroid hormones T4 and T3 stand for 4 and 3 molecules of iodine. Number two, accelerated thyroid. I believe since the pandemic, most people are running around with suboptimal thyroid. And so the combination of the iodine and the accelerated thyroid that restores thyroid function, enhanced with scalar frequencies to make it more effective than any other supplement out there, is that 1-2 punch to rev up that metabolism, help with fat burning, detoxing the thyroid. But then number three is the accelerated liver care. You got to have a functioning liver to convert the T4 to T3, to detox all the toxins that are causing the fat storage. Your fat cells are meant to store these toxins it doesn't know what to do with. And if you are not triggering that bile, like Mike was talking about, you're going to get that gallbladder sludge in the sludge. Well, accelerated liver care has the ingredients to trigger bile flow, to detox the organ, to restore the organ, to enhance that fat metabolism, reduce estrogen dominance. Remember, it's about hormones. And most of you are running around with too much of bad estrogen, not enough testosterone. So this will also help with that estrogen dominance. It helps with blood sugar and insulin resistance. So those would be the three supplements that I believe will get you off that hump. You can then incorporate some others. If you want a full plan, you can always reach out to me. Join the free group coaching on Telegram. And of course, email me if you need your own personal protocol. So thanks for listening today we are here at Accelerated Health with Sara Banta. I am on every podcast platform, including iHeartRadio, Amazon, Roku, YouTube, of course, Apple, E360, and over 100 different platforms. Share this podcast with your friends. The sugar diet is trending and your friends are talking about it. They need to know the facts. And Mike and I are, as we dive into it, it really clarifies the pros and the cons. You can also shop the supplements at Accelerated Health Products. Get 10% off with coupon code podcast10. And like I said, on the website, click on personalized protocol and I will put together a protocol for you. Thanks again for joining us here. And remember, I'm live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So join us next time for more ways to unlock your health potential.